Hey, welcome into the BWI Live Show. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We've got a great mid-morning treat for you, which is a bunch of recruiting information, recruiting talk, the latest on what's going on as we really get into it. I've said this now for like a month. We're in the final stretches of the class of 2025. We are less than 2 weeks away now. December 7th is a Wednesday, and that is when the December 4th. Thank you. Something's going on December 7th. And that's something else going on. I've got an event on December 7th. December 4th, there's so much going on in December. And that's part of what we're talking about today, which is all of the things going on in December for Penn State football, including recruiting. And December 4th, to kick things off, is the early signing period. We're going to be getting into the latest movement that's going on, which is going to be a moving target throughout the show, day and week. So welcome. We'll also talk to you and the game coming up this weekend with Minnesota. Get your predictions of what you think is going to happen this weekend. But our experts are here to lay on some Penn State football and recruiting knowledge. Ryan Snyder, Blue White Illustrated, our recruiting expert. Welcome to the show. What's going on? Latest hot off the presses. What are we talking about at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com today?
Well, if you got an event on December 7th, what happens if Penn State makes the Big Ten championship, T. Frank? Where are you going to be? I'm joking. They're not making the Big Ten championship. It's over.
Don't do that to him.
You made me crash like like Chrome.
On 300 this past week. We'll get into it. Obviously, we'll be working on that Maryland visitor list, that final one. Seeing if any 2025s creep on campus. It will be pretty much their last chance to try and get some guys in late, maybe for an official visit or two. So that will have our focus here, I think, starting about Sunday or so. But this was a week really kind of all about the on 300 and I've spent a lot of week, I spent some time, getting to know Terrence Wiggins, guys out of Coatesville this week, those kind of things. Of course, Malachi Goodman made a massive move in the on 300. We'll get into that as well. But really just kind of focus on that Maryland list and trying to figure out 2025s because, man, that signing day is coming on really fast this year. Yeah,
there was something just this morning from Chad Simmons on 3 National Reporter about Andrew Olesh. So all kinds of great stuff at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Fitz, if people want to sign up, we got a new deal for them. You want to let them know about it, or do you want me to take a ride on this one?
I do not have the details as fresh as you, so I would prefer if you did that.
Sure. So we've had our $1 deal for a while now, where you can sign up with $1 with promo code PSU1 to sign up for Blue White Illustrated to try it out. We've changed it around a little bit. Where now, instead of an extended trial, you get $1 for a week of access, and then you're enrolled for a year at our half price. So basically, we took our two best deals that everybody loves, the half off deal and the $1 deal, and we put them together. They got married and they had a baby, which is our new deal, which is you sign up for a week, you can try things out, and then you're enrolled in that yearly deal, 50% off. We just want to get you into the tent and have a big family of people at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, especially if you are one of our regulars here on the YouTube show. We've had so much success having great conversations with people here, and then we continue that conversation. We get to know each other better on the message board, because it's not just 60 minutes while we're all here tap dancing on screen. We get to have real conversations with you. So that's the new deal. $1 for a week, and then you get enrolled in our $50 or 50% off deal at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So you should check that out. Fitz, some of the things from you that they can read this week from Blue White Illustrated for that $1.
Yeah, it seems you were more ready for that promo than I was, so I appreciate you falling on that sword for me. Thank you very much. Barely. Minnesota prep. Hey, there's a football game this weekend. I know we're talking about playoffs, we're talking about signing day and everything like that, but they honestly, and I know the people that did the show on ESPN this week don't really watch the games, but like there is a game that you should watch this weekend. Penn State playing against Minnesota, 3:30 on Saturday. Plenty to talk about coming out of practice last night. Plenty to talk about with. It's a critical game. I don't know that Minnesota's great. I know they have some elements of some pretty good things.
Yeah, but
also they want to play spoiler. PJ Fleck, man. PJ Fleck loves PJ Fleck, and he loves to be a spoiler. Like that would be the feather in the cap there for Fleck's season. Obviously, they're looking to extend their postseason hopes. I forget what all that stuff looks like right now, but they're looking to extend their postseason hopes and get there as a program. But yeah, I can't think of many coaches in the Big Ten that would rather be a spoiler than PJ Fleck.
Minnesota's 6-4, by the way, with games
they're
against
6-4.
Penn State and Wisconsin.
Okay. I thought they were 5. Okay.
Yeah. So, hey, win one of these last 2 games, and it'll obviously help them.
Yeah.
A good bit with those bowls, but go ahead, T. Frank.
I was just going to say that the middle of the Big Ten is chock full of good teams, and teams that have, that are fighting week in and week out to get into that top 4 from all the same things that Penn State's trying to do from a recruiting and prestige perspective of being in the college football playoff. The next tier down is be at the top of the Big Ten standings, be relevant in the postseason, get to a good bowl. All that stuff still applies. It's just different degrees. And you're right. I think there's the ghost of 2019 stuck in everybody's head for Penn State football fans when the Nittany Lions were on the cusp. I'd say it fits, though. Go ahead, respond.
It's fascinating. So, like, every Illinois team that Penn State plays is the 2021 Illinois team that ran for 500 yards. Every Minnesota team is the 19 team. Every Iowa team is the Taquan Roberson game. Like, it's very funny how you get that sense of this is what a team is from a game that was from years ago and that obviously you lost. So like Michigan State, East Lansing, the most dangerous place in the world for Penn State to go. Like all these things, like they always pop to the forefront, even if they're not true anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, there are elements of this is a good team. We'll get into that at the end of the show. But we do need to get into what I thought was a really interesting response from James Franklin last night. We're going to skip some of our practice updates because at this point, Fitz, we've said the same thing for about a month. And if you want to read those things, you want to read some of the insights that we have that we don't normally share here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, bluewhiteillustrated.com for our practice updates. But James Franklin said something in his post-practice press conference that I thought was super interesting because, and I left the pause in here, and I'd like us to discuss this afterwards. His response to the criticism of the Big Ten having 4 of the top 5 spots in the college football playoff rankings, and I think more specifically, Penn State being number 4.
But I'll say this. I mean, obviously I'm concerned about Penn State, and obviously I'm concerned about the Big Ten. But I'm one of the few guys that have been a head coach in both conferences, and to me, the right thing to be talking about is the 2 best conferences in all of college football is the Big Ten and the SEC, and we should have the most teams in. I don't think there's any question to that. I think where it becomes problematic is when you have rules for certain teams and certain conferences to get in, and maybe people don't feel like they're actually in the top 12. I don't think we need to take shots in the Big Ten at the SEC because that's been proven over time, and I don't think the SEC should be taking shots at the Big Ten.
This is James Franklin is usually very, I don't want to say calculated, always sounds like it's maniacal, but he's very careful when he does stuff like this, knowing when he says something, it is going to cause an effect. Fitz, what do you think the reasoning behind responding was here? I guess why, I don't want to even say take the bait, but why respond to Kirby Smart and Paul Feinbaum and Greg McElroy and all of these people, both in the coaching community and on the national media, having this discourse about the playoff?
I think he's kind of saying out loud, hey, everyone knows the SEC and Big Ten are going to get preferential treatment. So let's just take it and run with it. Like you've got a situation where you're probably getting 4 teams from each league and maybe 3, it might be 7 out of 12 or whatever. But like, they know that they're on top of the mountain. They're just, looking down at the ACC, looking down at the Big 12, looking down at every other conference. And I think that that's kind of what you're getting at. Like, why are we kind of eating our own here? Right. Because the SEC and the Big Ten are the ones with the dollars. They're the ones that if things do break off, those are the 2 that are going to break off. Like that's kind of where I'm looking at that. And also, I love that hoodie, like the little quilted
looks
pattern.
Like a hunting vest, doesn't it?
Yeah, very great. I had to get that in there. As well as he dropped 2 obviously's in the first 10 seconds of that, which meant that he's thought about this before. He's got something like it's like the jukebox getting the record and taking it over and setting it down to play. Like that was where he was getting into it. So he's thought about this before, and I think he's thought of it in the sense that yes, everybody understands that the SEC and Big Ten are on top. Everybody perceives that the SEC is still on top, even with those multiple 2-loss teams, and I think that's kind of the conversation here. It's not about the people, the guys at the top. It's not about Oregon. Not about Texas right now. It's not about the guys that are going to win the conference. It's about those ones that are going to be from, I would say 8 to 12 that have 2 losses. Maybe you get a 3rd loss conversation in there for a Georgia or something like that. Like one of those big branded teams that could get in. Penn State's not one of those that could get in with 3 losses. So I don't see that happening this year, but I think that that's a conversation for the future. So I think that that's where he was going with that, is kind of like, hey, we're up in the mountaintop. Let's not push each other off. Let's just look down at all the pores. That's kind of where they're at.
Yeah. And I think not even veiled, the shot at the contract giving certain conferences an automatic bid in is also part of the conversation. Big 12, excuse me. Ryan, what do you think about this? What are your thoughts on Franklin's comments there the other day?
Everybody else was pushing for their teams in their conferences, right? I mean, why not James? We see that in the SEC all the time. We see that from coaches all over the place. I think Penn State's in a fine position. I still come back to, if you think that they're absolutely going to be the 6th seed, I still kind of question that a little bit. I think 7 or 8 is going to be a little more realistic. But I think James is saying what everybody knows. It's not that big of a deal. And that was his way of quietly politicking for his team and his conference, and why there should be 4 in, regardless of really what happens against Indiana and Ohio State this week. But all that only means so much. I mean, to me, it's all about going out these final 2 weeks and playing your best football, showing the country you're playing your best football, because there are a lot of national people right now who are not buying in to Penn State's record. And look, to some degree, it's fair. I think West Virginia kind of hurts them a little bit, the way their season's been so up and down. They don't get the respect they probably deserve for that win. But obviously Illinois is back in the top 25, and they played Ohio State way closer than I think everybody's giving them credit for. I've heard so many people this week being like, wow, well, Ohio State really dominated that whole game. I mean, sure, yeah, you can point to Will Howard fumbling at the 1, and obviously the pick 6. But Ohio State got a gift in that game too, with a hell of an interception in the end zone as well. And obviously that goal line stand came down to the wire. So I feel like the committee sees that Penn State was in that game more than maybe Booger McFarland or some other people do right now. Still can't believe Booger McFarland said that they should not play O'Rourke in this upcoming game, Indiana. But
no, that was Joey Galloway. Booger said,
I'm sorry, you're right.
Penn State struggled with UCLA in a game that was 27-3 with a minute left, something like that.
16, I've heard Booger McFarland say a lot of things on television that kind of disqualify him from an opinion. So I
like to root for Booger, but he lost me this week.
You can't watch all the games. Like, you can't do that. And they don't. They clearly take us up on that. I mean, that's kind of where it's at. I mean, it's TV, it's entertainment. You're looking for ways to move the bottom guys up, move the top guys down, and Penn State just happens to be in a prime spot where you can pick at that schedule. I have no problem with that. But they've taken care of business pretty amply, and especially since that's kind of the funny thing. Since they've started talking about Penn State as not an actual contender, they've looked pretty darn good against Washington and Purdue. Asterisks all around, obviously.
Sure,
but at the same time, like they've been more than taking care of business, I think.
Yeah, they've been hitting their stride and getting healthy at the right time, which I think is also part of the conversation for Penn State. We'll get into more of that. I got some thoughts about that.
Can I answer David real quick? He asked, how does Penn State fall to 7 or 8? Because I still feel like the Big Ten runner-up and the SEC runner-up are going to get the 5 and the 6 seed. And I get it. Indiana's up there right now.
So you're not saying in the scheduling as far as the bracket. You're saying they will fall to 7 or 8.
No. I'm saying in the bracket.
Okay. So those are two different conversations anyway. The ranking and the bracket are totally different.
Right. If I said ranking earlier, then that's my fault, David. That's not what I meant. But when you understand
the bracket all that matters, like.
Right. It is all that matters. Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I'm coming back to is, Indiana, if they lose this week, they're going to drop out. Penn State bumps up. All the SEC schools move up. All you need is, I mean, you guys watch the national. I mean, I think most of you guys watch the national narrative as much as I do. I mean, they want to have as many SEC schools in there as possible. And I think it'll probably end up being at least 4, maybe 3 for Big Ten, maybe Indiana. We'll see how they go this week. But I just think at the end of the day, it's going to be whoever loses the Big Ten in 5 and whoever loses the SEC in 6. And again, that's why I just come back to, you got to play your best football these next couple of weeks. You got to give no reason for any doubt to move schools above you. But Penn State's not going to have the schedule to really get a statement win or anything like that, where an Ole Miss or an Alabama or any of those schools having a massive win in the SEC championship gives them that opportunity. And that's where, again, go ahead, T-Frank, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just to clarify, essentially what's happening is 4 conference champions, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the runners up, and then Penn State or another team. So they are not like being knocked down any sort of pedestal. They're really just like the seeding goes, and then maybe you have a conversation about those teams that were in the championship games and not penalizing them for being in the championship game. That's really what you're saying here, Ryan, right?
Gotcha.
They'll be the highest ranked team not playing in those championship games among the SEC and Big Ten.
So my only pushback here is the loser of the SEC championship game could have 3 losses. So I understand not penalizing them for that, but also to put them over a 1-loss team, I think is going to be a conversation that happens. And
that's fair.
And that's where, that's where we were calling it the ranking versus the bracket, right? That's where the ranking, I think, would come into play here, is that committee seems pretty high on Penn State. I mean,
they always have been.
If you look at their strength of schedule, and I know that, again, this is the conversation. The strength of schedule says that they have a decently hard schedule. If you go and look at the Big Ten standings, they played the middle of the Big Ten. The bottom teams that they played in the Big Ten have all come Purdue last week, and then Maryland the final week of the season. USC has worked their way into the bottom of the Big Ten. But for the most part, like Illinois is in the middle, UCLA worked their way into the middle of the Big Ten. They might end up in the bottom half as this all works itself out. But that's kind of the argument, is like, if these teams in this conference, because they play 9 games, are consuming each other because they're all relatively good, but not great. And so you get more losses. And this is what James Franklin was saying a couple weeks ago, is that this is going to be closer to the NFL in a bunch of different ways, including parity. You're going to have teams that play and don't have pristine records, but are decent football teams. And Penn State's played a healthy number of those. Now, if you're saying that they haven't played the hardest schedule in America and those teams have been a little softer than we expected, that's absolutely fair. But the overreaction to their schedule is the part that seems to be where the championship committee and Penn State feel differently from media people and certain fans. We're going to move on, though. We got to get to today. Go ahead.
I got to think of this. Okay. What are the funniest ways that this playoff could just be chaos is so crazy to think about, because you've got big games coming up, yes, but also rivalry games coming up. Texas A&M, Alabama, Auburn, which Auburn's not good, but crazy things happen there. Egg Bowl.
Or the 26 last year, or whatever the hell it was. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, there's going to be some more chaos here that is beyond the games that we're looking at, which is this week. You've got Indiana, Ohio State, obviously 2 top 5 teams. It's an actual sentence that I just said. Army. I would love to see Army win against Notre Dame this weekend, not just because it would just be hilarious on one count, but because that throws another just wrench into this whole thing. So like, I'm rooting for the chaos. I'm rooting for the hilarity of it all. And as we've said for 3 weeks now, Penn State doesn't have much chaos on its schedule that it doesn't control. Like that, obviously you don't trip up. You don't want to trip up to anybody, but like these things can work themselves out in a way that is beneficial to Penn State, and is a way that Penn State could fall or could land in that 6th spot.
Last 2 things. Penn State fans should be rooting for it's chaos to some degree, but you should not be rooting for Indiana to beat Ohio State. That would not be a good thing if you're Penn State. That's the only chaos thing I don't think you want. And then last thing, I think Texas is better than Texas A&M. I think they will win that game, even if they're on the road. I don't know that Texas can beat Alabama, Georgia. We've already seen that, obviously, of course. And that's where you get that 5-6 situation. Who knows?
Guys,
I mean, there's a lot that has to play out.
Guys, this is one of the most fun seasons I can remember. Just because.
Absolutely.
This has been the most fun.
This is what we wanted, right?
Yes. This has
like
been the
Arizona
most fun
State
conversation
BYU this
about
weekend
it too.
is a great game. It's a great game. It sucks that it's on the same time as Penn State, Minnesota, but like that is a playing game in a lot of ways. And I get it, like that. I get it. They're down the road, and they're probably not national championship contenders. But how many games now have been so much better or emphasized because of this 12-team playoff? A ton.
Tennessee has to go to Vanderbilt. Oh my God. It's gonna be so great.
The ultimate spoiler this season has been Vanderbilt, and that has been awesome. And yeah, this has been the most fun conversation about these particular nuances that we've had on the show. So this has been awesome. I do want to give credit to someone else though on the show, and that is our sponsor, My Perfect Franchise, and Andy Ludicky over at My Perfect Franchise. If you are a person in corporate America and you are dying to get out because you see the value that you create for somebody else, you want to create that for yourself, consider owning a franchise, buying into a corporation, and then you buy an individual franchise and you manage that franchise that is yours to own and to run. Andy has done this, and he's got multiple franchises that he manages. So you can learn from him. He'll take you through the whole process. So if you have the investment, you have the the capital to do this, the knowledge, the expertise, and you want the next phase of your life to determine your own American dream, give him a call. 404-973-9901, Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. We've had Blue White Illustrated message board members that have joined Andy and bought into their own franchises, a painting franchise in Nashville. So again, doesn't even have to be in State College. If you're a Penn State fan and you live in New Jersey, Texas, Florida, somebody is in the chat here from Thailand. Emrys is hanging out in Thailand today. I don't know if he can help you in Thailand. There might be some international laws there that he's not equipped for, but I can tell you that he has a lot of different ways that he can help you because he's been through a lot of the ups and downs of managing this. And I'm pretty excited. I'm going to get some more information about this, but I believe a former Penn State football player has also signed on with Andy. So that's pretty cool that we can share these success stories with you to show you that this is not just something we talk about here on the show because he pays us to. This is something that can genuinely help you. Andy at myperfectfranchise.net to learn if you are right for franchise ownership. Always appreciate Andy here on the show. So let's get into our recruiting conversation for today and the latest recruiting news, because that's what these guys do best. We've got some recruiting list news. We've also got some other things coming up here. So I want to start with the latest on Penn State's latest commit. You both are muted, by the way. Who wants to take Chaz Coleman? Because I know that this is one that has been kind of moving pretty quickly. And Ryan Fitz, take Chaz Coleman commits recently. What's the latest there with Chaz Coleman?
I'll take it. Ohio State offered, guys. Shocker. After Zahir Mathis, of course, decommits, which we can get into that a little bit if you want. But to me, this felt like as soon as Zahir decommitted, I mean, Sean, did you not text me within 45 seconds of this situation is going to happen? Look, Chaz Coleman is arguably, no one has risen his stock or has grown his stock more in 3 months than Chaz Coleman. We now, the verified measurables, the film, everything's all there in place now. And this is an Ohio kid. And you lose Zahir Mathis, whether that was Ohio State, whether that's Zahir, that's here nor there really. But they need another DN. They have one in their backyard. A kid who was visited already. He went back for the Marshall game. There's clearly interest there. Whether he grew up an Ohio State fan, whatever, I don't know all those specifics. I didn't ask about it because he was committed to Penn State at the time. That's something we'll have to dig on a little bit more now. But, these situations in the past have not worked out great for Penn State. Now, with that said, now we're in a situation where he's got to kind of make a decision in 13 days. He doesn't have to, of course. That could drag out till February. But for me, it's really just, is he going to visit Ohio State this weekend? They have a massive game. They would love to get him on campus, I'm sure. That's what I'm focused on. If he goes out and visits Ohio State this weekend for that Indiana game, then I think Penn State fans need to be worried. But if he doesn't, not saying they don't have to still be worried. Ohio State usually gets what they want with in-state prospects, especially risers like this. But getting him on campus or not is a massive situation when you consider that Ohio State's away next weekend, and then boom, we're already in signing day.
Fitz, do you have anything you want to add on this particular situation?
No, it seemed inevitable in the sense that he's a really, really good player, a really explosive player, a player that fits Ohio State better than Zahir Mathis did, I think, in terms of prospects. I think he's a better prospect. That would not be a trade Penn State would be, in favor of if it does go that way. But I think it's one of those sad inevitabilities in terms of an Ohio kid. And I'm not saying he's definitely going to flip or anything like that, but the odds, the story has played out before, and it usually plays out pretty well for Ohio State. So an Ohio kid, those guys are pretty well conditioned. I know he's Northeast Ohio, so not quite in that bubble, but at the same time, still got that same state flag. So it's going to be tough for Penn State to keep him, I would think. Penn State did put in the time, effort, hosted him for an official visit, kind of stuck with him. I know that this was kind of an abridged recruitment, but at the same time, Penn State's been there longer. Having said that, it will be ultimately determined whether he shows up at Ohio State either of the next 2 weeks. And that's kind of where I go with that. If he does, you got to kind of tip your hat and say, good luck at the next stop, because that one's tough to beat.
Yeah. It's also interesting because Penn State has, it's not like Penn State doesn't have a long track record of also putting NFL defensive ends on the field. And it would be a position you feel like Penn State does have the opportunity to keep him on board and show him like there is nothing you can't do at Ohio State that you can do at Ohio State you can't do here from a career perspective. Right. I apologize because I was going through some of the chat to see if there were any of the things. Do you know if there is a contingency plan if all these things play out? Obviously, very short notice. Defensive end is going to be a portal conversation anyway, given how much they're losing. Do you think that there is a way to pivot quickly in this particular situation?
They've got a lot of edge guys. Like I was kind of stunned when I sat down the other day. Somebody asked me on the board, who are all the edge prospects in this class? And I think you can get up to 5, maybe 6 of them. Like with those in between guys, maybe a LeVar Arrington the second, Deshaun Burnett, those guys that are, maybe some of them we thought were linebackers at one point. Now all of a sudden you get there, and of course Coleman was in the mix in that as well. So it's not like they're short on those guys, but kind of short on guys like Coleman who kind of pop off in terms of athleticism and things like that. Not a shot at those other guys, but
right.
Coleman's pretty good prospect,
a complete package. Is what he is, right?
And your conversation about the portal, that's a separate conversation. None of these guys that are coming in next year, and we saw it. And by the way, we'll circle back on this real quickly. You saw it with the freshmen this year, who they're really high on in Max Granville and Jaylen Harvey, but it's very tough to get on the field that early and make an impact. Some guys have gotten on the field, like Dennis Sutton got on as a true freshman. These guys have gotten on as true freshmen, but the true scope of impact that you need to build your position around for that particular season, and which we're talking 2025, it's gonna be tough for 2025. And Coleman was never that guy anyway. He's a
very curious to see what Denai does after this season.
Yes,
I think that's it.
Yeah. I did want to circle back around because we kind of skipped over practice, but Jaylen Harvey was out there last night. And that is something we reported earlier this week, that he was fine. My eyes didn't want to believe it because that injury looked bad. It looked like I was counting the clock on how long it takes an ACL to get back. He dodged a bullet. Penn State dodged a bullet. Jaylen Harvey's back. He's in practice. I don't know that he's going to play. I don't think he's fully healthy. He's not fully healthy. But at the same time, him being out on the practice field, one of those minor miracles that you'll definitely take every day. So really, really cool. Doesn't happen like that often when you see an injury that looks that bad and it's just ends up just being a hyperextension. Hey, it can happen. So that's great. But to not lose Harvey for a spring that's going to be very important for him as they go to rebuild that defensive end room, I think it's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something that when given the nature of the injury, to be practicing says volumes, that you're not putting him out there willy-nilly. And it's not a guy that you're trying to say, well, we really want Minnesota to know he's out there. Like there's no subterfuge about Jaylen Harvey being on the practice field. It's just straight up good news. Let's go on to something else James Franklin talked about. And Ryan, you wrote about this over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. The changes to signing day and December. We've touched on the portal, all that stuff. But here's what James Franklin had to say about how signing day itself and their signing day draft celebration is going to go this year.
Even signing day is going to be different. Like we're going to have signing day, and typically it's the whole staff. It's going to be me and the recruiting staff, and the rest of the coaches are going to be doing the game planning and doing all those types of things. So we do take some time every single week where myself and those guys will organize it, and then we'll include the coaches in the part of the conversation that they need to be a part of.
So does this change anything is it just a formatting perspective, or does this kind of signal that there are changes to how they're pivoting towards obviously prep for a playoff game and then all the other stuff that goes
What was interesting to me is the 1-0 mentality. We talk about that all the time, right? Never looking ahead. But he's admitting they kind of have to, right? And with a game at Minnesota this week, which no, I'm not going to call it a trap game or anything like that, but it's still a game that Penn State has to have its full focus on. It was interesting to me that James just wanted to that kind of detail on the question, because it's usually not his thing. But this isn't a surprise, right? Penn State was expected to get into the playoff before this year, and all these top teams, when you have the support staff to be able to do this, you have to start planning ahead for this. And this is probably something that they've been doing for weeks and weeks now, maybe even before Ohio State and those Washington games. I think the big thing to know is just the support staff. What I mainly wrote about is just how much this recruiting staff has grown over the years and how this is a lot easier for them to accomplish now. This support staff was the recruiting staff was at 8 members in 2021. It's now almost double, up to 14. And depending on how you look at it, there's some, people like Dan Connor and others who are very heavy in recruiting, but they're not really technically recruiting staff that, have a big impact on some things. But look, the main thing to know is coaches are not going to be out on the road in December. It is a massive difference. It's a good thing for coaches, especially because coaches in this situation, especially with having to prepare for playoff games. I am curious to see down the road, not that coaches will ever get on the road in December, but just how this recruiting schedule continues to shift. Because to me, I'll come back to May. There's other months in the calendar that we can utilize better than having a signing day during championship week. I'm not a fan of it personally. I still think that these guys should have been able to sign in July, and I think a lot of people want that, but the NCAA was kind of scared to make such a quick decision with that. But that talk's not going to go away. We'll see where things go. Last thing I'll add is, and I'll give Sean credit, he's kind of learned more about this, but recruits aren't allowed to attend the playoff game. So I think people are going to think that that's going to be a massive advantage. Let me clarify. They are allowed to attend, but they have to pay
just like
whatever the rate is. They're not going to be able to get them in for $10 or anything like that. Put it that way. So I wouldn't be shocked if you see some committed guys, some local guys up, but having 150 plus recruits in attendance like you've seen for Washington and Ohio State and stuff like that, that's not how it's going to work. The playoff game is ran by the College Football Playoff Committee, and NCAA rules don't allow schools to host players or recruits for postseason events. It's basically a bowl game at Beaver Stadium is the best way to look at it.
Got it. Anything you want to add there, Fitz, or do you want to move on to some other stuff?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, acknowledging that on December 4th, all those coaches are going to be game planning and stuff. They're not going to know who they're playing at that point. There's a lot of time that will, in hindsight, be wasted, but they're going to do full scouts on all these programs that they could potentially play, so that on December 8th or 9th or whenever the selection show is, they hit the ground running with that game prep. So these guys, all these analysts, all these coaches, all these things that they have in that sector of their program are going to be very busy with all that stuff. So that'll be interesting. And I will say, building off of what Ryan said about the bigger recruiting staff, those guys are responsible for a lot more actual recruiting now, like contact with families, contact with prospects, all that kind of stuff. It used to be, you lean on Terry Smith and Dex and all these guys to do the recruiting for their position, but a lot of those gaps are filled now by Kenny Sanders and Alan Zamitis and Slim and all these guys that are sort of working in the shadows. I think the people watching this show, listening to the show, know their names, but don't understand that they're a huge part of the actual recruiting, not so much as administrative guys as they have been in years past. So I think that's worth crediting those guys as well. You will see what happens with that. As Ryan mentioned, you can't sell or you can't give out postseason tickets for these games. And so how this works during the season is you have a certain allotment and you can give them out to players for free of charge. They have to pay for the buffet or whatever and things like that, because you got to keep it above board. But, can't do that because the NCAA is running it, ESPN's running it. All the ticket revenue and stuff like that is controlled by the College Football Playoff, and you can't get around that. So you'll see guys there, but they paid their own way, just like you, or no, not us. We get credentials, which is pretty great. But just like the people listening to this will have if they attend the playoff game.
This is just another example of where college football is pivoting to be more like the NFL, because there's too many responsibilities all happening at the same time. There's a pro recruiting there's a pro scouting department and a college scouting department within an NFL organization, so they can get through all of this massive amount of information. And it's kind of the same thing with the portal and with college recruiting. You need to have these people and structures. And again, if you're thinking we need to go back to yesteryear where it was 5 coaches and Joe Paterno was also the athletic director, those responsibilities are now dedicated to all these other things.
Yeah, and I call it time wasted because there's really not really a way around it. But the same thing happens with the portal. I mean, they're scouting full rosters here, hoping guys go in, and it ends up 90% of those guys won't go in the portal. That's kind of how this all works. Is you just have to be prepared, because if a guy hits the portal and you don't have your scout done on him, you're already behind. So that's kind of where you're figuring out how all that stuff works. So it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of under the rug stuff that you don't think about, but it's a lot of work, man. They work some long days. Ryan, I know people have approached you about, hey, wouldn't you love to work in the recruiting department at Penn State? No, I'm good.
I like seeing my family, man.
To me, what is the dollar amount? And then we'll have a conversation. But I don't think I'm commanding the dollar amount that makes that work.
There's a reason they have, I think it's 54. If you include the staff, it's like 54, 55 total people in the football support staff, including the coaching staff in that, of course. I mean, man, what was that number 5-6 years ago, Sean? Not half that, but it was in the 30s, I would assume, somewhere in that ballpark. So this is why James flirted with USC and some of those other schools. It was to be able to build up these staffs, and you're seeing if you follow recruiting, obviously Sean and I follow it really closely, like the amount of recruits that we talk to now, and I'm like, who you talking to, who you getting to know? It's all about AZ, Khalil Ahmad, DJ Bryant, the LBs or the LBs, the Rashads, LB and Rashad Rich. Those guys do a lot of the communication, as Sean said, and of course, as things progress, you'll get the assistant coaches very much involved as well. But that's why James needed the money and the support to build up a staff like this, and you're seeing the results.
For sure. And the results have come in the class of 2025 and beyond. Some of the success they've had in 2026. We're going to touch on both of those here in just one second. Actually, no, we're going to touch on that right now. Ryan, you talked to Charles Power about Malachi Goodman. We highlighted Malachi's rise up the recruiting rankings. He is now a top 50 player in the On 300 for the class of 2025. We didn't really get into this, Fitz. We didn't have enough time. There's so much stuff on the Tuesday show. So I do want to talk about the list and some of the movement around that list. But Ryan, why did Malachi Goodman rise so high up the list, and why is On 3 so high on this Penn State commit?
He's one of the few guys I don't need Charles' opinion on, because I was able to watch Malachi this year, and obviously from an athletic perspective, all those things are there, but fundamentally, I thought one of the best offensive line prospects that I've watched in the last couple of years. It's just all there as far as able to use his hands, use his play strength, all those kind of different things. Malachi's got it all. And I think the biggest takeaway from talking to Charles was that he's very high on this offensive line class. It's not like, we've talked about how D-line was kind of down the last couple of years in the area, at least. Well, Charles believes that this is one of the better offensive line classes in recent years nationally. So for Goodman to make that move and be one of those guys that are consistently on the rise, I think that's what kind of stood out to me the most from that conversation. But without a doubt, I mean, we've talked about it a long time. I think Owen Alicini is one of the more impressive athletic prospects in this class. And some of the numbers he's able to put up at 6'7" plus is mind-boggling to some degree. But if you're looking for a guy who can come in and maybe make an impact early, Goodman has that fundamental base, and obviously all the other little tangibles too, that makes him the guy to point to. Which, by the way, real quick, I mean, offensive line recruiting, Goodman, going back over the years to Cooper Cousins and stuff, I mean, Troutwine is doing a hell of a job there.
Yeah, Fitz, that was the thing I was thinking as I was trying to think of the last Penn State offensive lineman that had the combination of size, all the tools you're looking for, and has that first-year translation. And then, Cooper Cousins is the guy, and he's playing right now. So I guess, I don't want you to say, like, rank these two, but do you kind of get the same feeling of Malachi Goodman having a quicker transition to the field like that?
I wouldn't put him on that Cooper Cousins level, just to clarify.
Again, I'm trying not to. I'm trying to have the conversation in context here, for sure.
I don't. I don't. I think there's some restructuring to go, redistribution of weight with Goodman, and I think he's done a good job. And I mentioned it on the show earlier this week, he started out the season a little bit heavier and sort of played his way into shape. And when he played his way into shape, I think that tape just went up. So I think that's kind of what Charles was saying. And also, like, Cooper is kind of his own guy in terms of like the prep for that. And I don't see too many people coming on that level. So I don't see it. Plus he's got more in front of him next year. I think if everything happens that we think it will in terms of guys coming back, you look at Goodman and say, he's going to walk into, if he's going to play offensive tackle, you feel pretty decent about having a 2 deep with Shelton, with Egan Boyer, who's, I think moving his way into some things. He played this weekend against Purdue. And then Donka and Rucci. So I don't think there's a need. There wasn't necessarily a need with Cousins either, but like he was kind of above that line where it didn't really matter and translated into, hey, he's going to play no matter what. So I don't think Goodman's at that point. I just, it's offensive line recruiting. They're different prospects at different paces. Right. And that's kind of what you forget sometimes. You say, oh, this guy's a 5-star. You think of Javen Williams, this guy's a 5-star. He should be playing right away. And it's not necessarily the case. Javen was always a guy that was like a year 3 guy, just based on his game as a whole and his background. So I think, some guys will get there later in their career. Some guys will get there early. I think Malachi is probably right in the middle.
Yeah, and that's great context to add, because again, you talk about the rankings, and Penn State has gotten quite a few of these highly ranked offensive linemen that have different timelines. I think the Egan Boyer conversation is one, but when you see a guy who's listed at 315, everyone wants to know like that. And I love that we can provide the context to that particular situation. Ryan, I want to go back to the list of players that moved around. Who were the players that you were surprised by or pleased with that you think we have more in a correct ranking from where you saw and what you've heard about Penn State's feeling about these players?
Jaden Woods moved up the most of anybody. I apologize. I was away on Monday, so Sean, it was 120 some spots. I want to say. I apologize.
I think off the top of my head.
Yeah. Either way, I mean, he moved from back end of the 300 up to about 140 or so overall. And I think that from talking to Charles previously, the thing that he kept kind of coming back to was like, we see all the athleticism, all the numbers and all that. They really wanted to see him take that next step on the field this year. My man had 90 tackles as an edge rusher this year. I mean, That is some serious numbers, up from 70 last year, up from 50 as a sophomore. So he did a good job of taking that next step in a lot of ways. I think the thing with Woods too is he has that athleticism where he can drop into space as well, and do some more things than just strictly rush off the edge. So I think that's what's enticing about Jaden Woods. I'll be honest, I haven't watched a ton of Kansas football this year, so I can't pretend I watched too many of his full games or anything like that. But I mean,
we would have known
the numbers,
but he would have ended up only playing on offense that day or something.
Yeah, good point.
He's playing Mike linebacker in a couple of these highlight clips, so clearly a guy they used across the defensive front. And one of the things I'm excited by watching this is his hand usage was good last year, and he's continued to develop that kind of maturity to his game. There's the context here, please, is that no freshman is great with their hands. No, young guys coming in, an NFL savvy defensive. But if you have an awareness of using your hands as a pass rusher and you're not winning with just athleticism, and you're a guy with Jaden Woods' athleticism, I love seeing the awareness and the understanding of the game of football and of your position. So you've got the athleticism, you've got the hand usage. The next thing is just how much weight can they pack onto his frame, and when does he get here? Because a guy I'm super excited about just watching these highlights, not seeing the full game film footage either. We didn't get a chance to talk about him on Monday. Fitz, do you have any other thoughts on Jaden Woods here?
Yeah, Ryan has not watched much Kansas high school football, but Mill Valley just fell last weekend to Aquinas in the state playoffs, 23-22. It was a situation where they were leading, I think, in the last minute of the game, and Aquinas scored, went to go tie the game, and there was, I think, an encroachment penalty on the extra point. So Aquinas went for it and won 23-22. And there's some highlights out there that are just awesome, but also heartbreaking for Jaden Woods' team, because that's a tough way to go out.
Yeah, for sure. I want to throw this up here just so everyone can see again where Jaden Woods is on the list of 141st overall. So, the situation with, edge rusher and Chaz Coleman, Penn State still does have in the freaky athlete here at defensive end. Does this, I guess, let's rewind back now and talk about Max Granville in this conversation at defensive end. How much of a benefit was it to get him to reclassify? So you had that room where maybe if this sticks, you could add more players at that edge rusher, given how much they're losing and how much they could reload potentially with all of these players if it holds for the next 2 weeks.
I don't think room really matters that much. Sean, would you agree?
No, I mean, they had commitments from Burnett, Cortez Harris, Jaden Woods. And honestly, we're going to talk about, I'm going to force Ivan Kaju into the conversation here as well. You had those commits from those guys. So maybe it gives you a little bit more room in terms of going after Chaz Coleman, but I don't think that had a big impact on it. It does, help spread out your your roster building at that position. So it gives you another guy a year ahead of this bigger class. So I think that does help. But at the same time, it's I don't think it changes all that much. And it's great to get him in. I understand that skipping a year isn't necessarily ideal when you take a look at the sort of feedback that you've gotten from players that have done it in the past, but like it does help in this situation to build out that position. And especially in 2025, he's now going to get on the field, where I think that would have been a red shirt for him next year when he arrived.
Granville's already kind of proven to me that it's worked out for him. Not, it's not even just the fact he's getting on the field, but I'm just saying the feedback that everybody's getting. They seem to he seemed to be as prepared as anyone to do that. Go ahead.
Absolutely, but in 2 years, when we're talking about him possibly going to the draft, people are going to be like, well, they didn't get the full complement of him because he came in a red period. Like it's the KJ Hamler injury thing. It's like, it's like boom, poof, and this is completely unfounded speculation in terms of like how good he's going to be. But if that happens, you're going to get that argument. It's just going to happen.
Yeah. Good point.
Oh yeah, for sure. But for his development and his timeline, that's excellent. And I think if you can sell that to players of look what we did with a guy who was 18 when he got here. Again, these are all data points about trying to lure in the best talent. And these guys that they're getting, I feel like unequivocally are great defensive ends. Like it's super easy when we're doing the film evaluation, being like, that dude's a super athlete, but he's 6'3", and then this guy's a super athlete and he's 6'5". It's so much easier when the players are actually good. Ryan, any other things from the list that stand out to you? Do you want to move on to some of the other topics today?
Not too much. I mean, Sean, you went through it a little bit. Like I said, I was gone Monday. You went through it a little bit more than me. Lyric Samuel dropped out, but it's just so much limited information there. I kind of get that to some degree. Anything you want to add, Sean? I don't know.
Yes. Ivan Kaju should be a 4-star. I think. He's an 89, so he's on the cusp. But people honestly only see the stars. Like you only see the 4 versus the 3, even though he's close to being a 4. Phenomenal senior season, phenomenal testing numbers, phenomenal length, size, all that kind of stuff. I'm very curious to see how they use him because he's 6'3 plus 235 right now, and he's got long arms. So that tells me when he gets here in the spring, he's probably going to be defensive end. Like he's probably going to be one of those guys that starts off on the edge. Now, I'm very curious to see which path he takes because you're talking about him as a potential, or when he committed, we're talking about him as a potential defensive tackle. And I think he's got the frame to add a bunch of weight. But at the same time, like there's some really good stuff on his senior year film there. I'm like, maybe this guy can stick. And I'm not sure if, I don't know if that I want to go Zariah Fisher here, like, or maybe Vanover, like as a guy that definitely could add weight, but not necessarily going to add weight. He's got the big features, he's got the big head, he's got the big hands and all that kind of stuff that Vanover has. So very curious to see where that goes, but I think he's got some plus athletic ability for that. Plus athletic ability as a defensive tackle and really good athletic ability as a defensive end. So when the rankings came out, I was honestly kind of disappointed that he wasn't up there just because he's been so good this year.
One thing I'll add too, I mean, he could still be a 4-star in the industry rankings. 24/7 has him as the 71st ranked edge in the country. I mean, if they update that, he's 452 right now nationally. You got to be top 400 to be an industry 4-star. Something to keep an eye on.
And if you think I'm not going to come back with the 71th, that was
71th. Yeah,
71th.
I know.
That was pretty great.
Yeah, that was pathetic. In fact, I'm exiting out now. Goodbye, everybody. It was fun talking.
All right. Well, let's get on to our game preview. Penn State, Minnesota coming up this Saturday. So we're going to talk about the immediate future of the Nittany Lions and their, the last team that presents some of these things that you would say are a real test. At least that's my opinion. I probably shouldn't be leading the witnesses here. But I guess, Fitz, I want to start with you. What do you think about Minnesota? You gave a kind of a general opinion in the beginning of the show. What do you think of Minnesota? What do you think of this game? Because there are some people that are saying this is a trap game. I agree with the real zeal. The trap game is against a team that isn't good, which would be Maryland at the end of the season. What's your opinion on Minnesota?
Yeah, I think you guys are a little bit higher on Minnesota than I am, but I think it's mostly for me, it's an offensive it's an offensive approach. I think Minnesota's defense is good, and I'm very curious to see how Drew Aller handles these safeties. Coy Parrish is awesome. Like he's as a freshman, he's fantastic, and he's going to be a great player there. And it's a great college football story, staying home and picking Minnesota over Ohio State, and that's really awesome. But yeah, he's going to be an all Big Ten guy for years to come here. But yeah, I mean, you look at what, like, I'm kind of scarred by that Rutgers game for Minnesota because they did not look good. And Rutgers got 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss. Rutgers was able to manhandle Minnesota at the line of scrimmage, and the quarterback was not mobile enough to get around it. And I think that's says really good things for Penn State's defensive line, because it's much better than Rutgers, who, by the way, is banged up. Like, I mean, it wasn't like an almighty effort by Rutgers or anything like that. They've got some players that are hurt, and all of a sudden, they're beating around beating around Minnesota. Minnesota scored late in that game to actually make it a little bit closer than it was. So I'm very curious to see how, after 2 weeks after the bye week, Minnesota's offense is able to function. That running game has been very much up and down. I think Scott had 28 yards against Rutgers or something like that. So to me, it's about the ability to dominate the line of scrimmage on the defensive side of the ball. I think Minnesota's defense can give Penn State some issues. Like I think that they're a well-coached defense. They're in the right spots. Lacking athleticism at some spots, but surprising athleticism in others. Like it's not a bad defense at all. So I'm very curious to see how that one plays out. And I think Penn State is going to have an opportunity to continue to be efficient. As I said in my predictions, Tyler Warren on CBS is a superhero. So this is the third CBS game this year. So maybe maybe he's headed that way once again, and maybe we're
play into the demographic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Everyone loves the tight end, especially one that is catching 11 passes or 20 passes per game. Ryan, what do you think of Minnesota? Is there anything you disagree there with Fitz about?
No, definitely don't disagree. You look at the numbers, right? 16 interceptions for Minnesota this year. Well, Drew Allar's pretty good at not throwing interceptions. He's thrown a few more this year, obviously, than last year. But I think that's, for a stat, that's a stat for a lot of teams that would grab my attention. But I feel pretty confident that Drew's not going to make too many mistakes. They have had at least one interception, I believe, in all but 1 or 2 games this year. I think Iowa, they didn't throw one, and maybe there was 1 or 2 others. But also, out of those 16 interceptions, 3 came against Nevada, 3 came against Rhode Island. I think 3 came against UCLA. So they it's a little distorted a bit. You also look at rushing defense, right? They have a lot of people would say they have a pretty good rushing defense, and obviously Penn State's rushing offense has been a little lackluster at times this year. But look at the 3 games that really mattered to me in my eyes. Iowa ran for 272 against them. Michigan ran, for 155 against them. And then, Illinois was, I think, in the 120s, 130s as well. So against the better teams, they have been able to put up respectable rushing numbers. They again, just if you look at some of the lesser teams,
it's like
they played,
completely backwards to the way it should be, right? Like that was my thought. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at it. I mean, to me, again, like this is about Penn State's offense doing what Penn State offense need to do. I have full confidence that Penn State's defense can certainly keep Minnesota to 17 max. I feel like if Minnesota gets 21 points in this game, I'd be surprised. Do we all agree with that, or does anyone?
Oh, for sure.
Over 20.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
the more
26.7 in all games. So that's
To me, I feel like this is. I mean, we'll get in our prediction in a second, but like this is another situation where the third quarter just should set up really well for Penn State. Probably a little closer at halftime. Fans want to see, but then they take over in the third quarter, and maybe a backdoor touchdown keeps it from being a Penn State win on the ATS. But this should be a game that Penn State controls in the second half. I would think. Yeah,
I started watching the offense last night, I think it was, or yesterday afternoon, and I kept I think my initial point total in another site that asked me for a prediction, I think it was like 28-17. And every single drive I watched from the Minnesota offense, I kept deducting points from my total because there's issues with, to me, team speed on defense or on offense, for Minnesota. And if you have a Penn State defense that locks down receivers that are good, that locks down quality receivers, and their main focus and threats are tight ends and running backs and screens and things that are low value targets, I have a hard time, countering anything there. The part that I would say that I like this defense from a bunch of different perspectives. I like the fact that it does some mature things on defense from a scheme perspective, where they're doing NFL level switches in the secondary. So they play zone in a way that kind of feels like man at times, and they're able to predict where routes are going instead of just spot dropping and playing grass. You guys are right, though. Drew, I guess that's the part that I'm interested in. Not that I think Drew Aller is going to throw interceptions, but I want to see how he deals with these things that maybe he hasn't seen as much this year, because this is probably the best test from an intelligence standpoint for him and from a decision-making standpoint for him that he's seen in a while. Obviously, the Ohio State game is one thing where they play a very good defense with a lot of talent. This is schematically good and has enough talent to challenge them. So how does, I guess, Fitz, the way I'm looking at this, if they score really efficiently in this game, and if they score a lot of points, to me, this is a test that people thought Washington was, where it's like, no, this is a good defense. Like, if they do well, that says that they've done something. Are you laughing at the fact that in the middle of that?
No, I'm laughing at the text that I sent you when you said this. You sent me the text the other night and said, this is a good defense. I was like Washington's a good defense or like an actual good defense. And that was the comparison that I got. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of those ones that'll probably be more impressive than you think. But then you look around at that schedule and I don't know. It just hasn't added up this year. Some of the scores are kind of backwards. Some of the, as Ryan mentioned, some of the rushing numbers and stuff like that are kind of backwards as well. You look at 31-14 against Iowa. I mean, I still get that Iowa brain fog in my head in terms of like the offensive numbers that can come like that. Like it's not far from my prediction. And I think Penn State's a better offense than Iowa. They've got that win against Southern Cal. They got that win against UCLA, Maryland. So, they were on a roll there, beat Illinois, who's not a bad team. And then all of a sudden you run into Rutgers and it's 11 a.m. in Piscataway, or I guess it's noon in Piscataway, and, you kind of fall flat. So I think it was like building momentum. And then all of a sudden falling flat in your face. So how do they bounce back after the bye week? So we'll see that.
Yeah.
And one more thing, I called Darius Taylor, Darius Scott, and I don't know why I did that, but it's bothered me for the last 5 minutes. So he's a good back, and I should not get his name wrong.
Just like I meant to say 70th, not 71st, something like that. Anyway,
good cover.
I did.
All right. So let's mercifully end all of our flubbing with the English language, and let's get to our predictions. Game predictions here for Penn State, Minnesota. Ryan, I do want to start with you on your prediction, and then we'll work our way to Fitz just by canonically how many points Penn State is going to score, not to give anything away. But Ryan, what do you think?
I went 24-17, and honestly, I'm still kind of thinking, like, how is Minnesota going to get 17 points in this game? Easily the best defense they've faced this season. I'm really excited actually to watch Ariante Ursi against Abdul Carter. These are two projected first round picks, and Abdul Carter has been getting a ton of praise lately, and he's deserved it. He's been excellent. It's not just the numbers as far as a tackle for lost sack perspective, but how much of a hassle he is, and hurries and pressures and all those things. Well, he's going probably against the best offensive lineman he's seen this season. Am I wrong with that? Is anyone? Yeah, I can't think of a tackle that he's faced that's more coveted, I guess, than Ursi. So really curious to see how he does. But I also believe that Penn State's remaining defensive linemen, at least certainly the starters, Jay Thomas and Durant and Denai, they all seem to have matchup advantages. And really, what we've seen from is it Brosmer? Is that how we pronounce his last name?
The quarterback.
Yeah.
Sure.
When he's not under pressure, he's put up some decent numbers. But when he's under pressure, I think his analytics dropped to like 90th or something in the country.
Yep.
Like, it is a massive discrepancy there between what he's able to do with 3-4 seconds of time and what he's not able, or when he has to actually move around and make decisions on the fly. So I think that bodes really well for Penn State. I want 24-17. I wouldn't be shocked if it's more like a 28-14 or something like that. I played it a little bit conservative, but this is a game that Penn State, again, should control in the second half.
Yeah, I lied. Fitz, we're coming to you next. What's your score prediction, and how do you think this is going?
You talk about Darius Taylor and the multi-pronged attack that he can bring to you, because he's done really good on the ground, of course, but receiving, he's got 45 catches. It's just 312 yards. So just
I think
under
he's second with
catch.
50 targets.
Yeah, they throw to him a lot. So Penn State's second level defenders, and if they get that ball out in the flat, Penn State's defensive ends will have to tackle. And he's a good player. So I'm very curious how that happens. I believe someone said it in the chat to throw some screen. It's kind of that we hit that stretch a few weeks ago where you're playing teams that are just going to try and screen and draw you to death. And I think that Minnesota could end up in that avenue, which that's how I would attack Penn State if I probably had the lesser of the two talents. So in terms of prediction, I've got Penn State 31, Minnesota 13. I don't really see a scenario where Penn State's overlooking this one. I know we throw the trap game stuff around, and it is certainly the most difficult scenario / situation that they'll play in the last 4 games. But I think that the focus is clear. Penn State's done a nice job doing that 1-0 mantra every week, and it matters this time of year. So they understand that they can't slip up at all. You talk about the chatter and how much that means throughout the week with the selection show and everybody kind of being down on them. But there's one way to handle that, and that's just by winning. And I think Penn State's in a good spot to do that. Yeah,
and to me, again, guys have said it all, but the reason Minnesota's in this game is if Penn State does not play their best possible game, because if they do, there's no way that Minnesota can contend with the Nittany Lions across the board. A couple of key matchups, though, that I do want to get to, I guess, in my mind, the defensive tackles against Penn State's interior. When Penn State's interior, especially the right guard and center, are able to play up to the standard of the opponent, there's not really much other teams can do, because you get that efficiency in the ground game, and then suddenly everything else is working. I really like these defensive tackles. I don't think that they're superstars, but Jalen Long-Redding and Devon Eastern are both good football players. 97, he's got quick hands. He's pretty explosive for a big guy. That might cause them some problems, but the way that Rutgers won, they attacked the linebackers, they threw underneath. What does that sound like? That sounds like a Tyler Warren feast day. So unless there's something that Minnesota has done in the bye week to completely eliminate that, then I don't know necessarily. And teams do seem to give Penn State their best shot, especially coming off a bye, and mix things up. So I'm curious this week to see what the wrinkles are. I went 27-10. I would think Penn State can score in the 30s. I just, some of those matchups, if they're able to take away Tyler Warren, we might get into one of those slog situations. But overall, Penn State should win this game. Final thoughts from you guys as we get out of here. Fitz, you got something?
Shippensburg's Anthony Smith has 3 sacks in the last 4 games for Minnesota. He's done a nice job out there. I'm very curious to see how that plays out with him and the chip on the shoulder narrative and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that Penn State should be okay. Just got to take care of business, protect the football, and they've done a pretty good job of that throughout the season. I don't know. Let's just meet back here next week and talk about receivers. How about
that? Ryan, what's coming up from you this week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com?
Just chipping away at that Maryland list, guys. Here we go. 13 days, 12 days basically now till signing day. So let's see what happens here over the next week. This is their last chance to really host official visitors. And, scholarship counts are rising. They've been incredibly aggressive. All these schools right now are being incredibly aggressive, it feels like, with 2025 recruiting, more so than what we've seen in a lot of other years because of all the changes and, scholarship changes and all that stuff. So going to be a very, very interesting 12, 13 days here down the stretch.
And last live recruiting show today until signing day. So yeah.
Good point.
I've meant to mention this earlier in the show. Appreciate you bringing that up. Next week is our exclusive Inside the Den podcast coming up on Monday. We're going to meet here much sooner than normal. We're going to be recording that and then putting it out at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So no recruiting show because it's on Thanksgiving, but we still want to give you something, and we want to give you a nice taste of what you can get for that $1 deal at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Great time to sign up so you can get all that recruiting intel heading into National Signing Day, but there's no reason not to sign up at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Appreciate everyone here who's listening to the show. Like the video, and as always, I should say this more often, if you're listening to the podcast, please give us a 5-star review, leave a comment, all those things that help us grow that side of the show, which is integral to our success overall. Right.
I was willing to do a show for you guys next Thursday. But
I wasn't.
To get out of my in-laws, I was willing to do a 2-hour show. But
listen, I'm the host. I'm cooking the turkey. I'll be up at 5. We're not doing a show. I'm not posting a show. I am cooking, and I am eating and watching football. That's
wait until your in-laws move in the area and they got like 9 kids, and then they make your kids all hyper, and then you want to sleep, but you can't sleep after the turkey. And yeah, it's great. Yay.
Mine live in Utah, and they're never coming out here. So.
Right. We'll try to line up a commitment for next Thursday morning. Somebody will put out a thankful graphic, and then keep ranking.
I'll be texting Greg.
I think Zoe might actually leave. That might actually happen. We've got to leave though. We're out of time. Thank you so much for everyone being here. We got the tailgate show coming up 12:30 on Saturday. Next time I'll be talking to you. We'll talk to you then.